Greetings from Costa Rica. My name is Matt Rosensteel, broadcasting live here today, Friday, for our Costa Rica Real Estate Forum number 14. Today we have a special broadcast location, a contingency, the air conditioning in our office blew out, so we had to look for another place to broadcast. Luckily, I'm in a condo that's very relevant to you if you're looking to either buy a piece of property here in Costa Rica or find a wonderful rental that's in a very secure location. We'll be talking about the condo later. The main topic of our discussion today is crashes or economic crises in Guanacaste. I don't necessarily want to say that I think a crash is imminent or that we're already going through one or that one is going to come along any certain timeline. If you know me well, you know that I feel cyclical economic crises are about as regular as rainfall, and rather than getting upset about them, you really just have to see them in the right light and be ready to shift with the market. As always, here on Costa Rica Matt, we're looking to provide unbiased information to help empower people to make good decisions here in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. And I'm hearing a lot more from all of my prospects that they think something big is in the pipeline and that we could soon be looking at another economic crisis. So today on my show, and remember, this is neither legal advice nor pure investment advice. Don't spend money based exactly on what you hear me say right now. Today, I want to go over crises in Guanacaste, and specifically, I want to tap into my experience living here through 2009, 10, and then the aftermath of the global financial crisis that hit. I want to talk a little bit about historic crises in Costa Rica and how they've affected Guanacaste, to not only talk about a hypothetical possibility. I'm definitely going to talk about 2009, 10, and the aftermath. And really, I hope to separate the difference between the economic crisis for Guanacaste families and communities and the economic crisis for all of the developers who were trying to sell real estate in the area at that time. Finally, I want to try and discuss just a bit who would win in a future crisis, or how people can position themselves well in Guanacaste if in fact we're looking at a near or medium term crisis. And at the end of this episode, I'd love to offer some very helpful advice to the brand new realtors in Guanacaste, the agents, all of those helpful people who have arrived here very recently in the grand scale of things, who are about to likely face one of the first difficult markets that they've dealt with. Stay tuned. Folks, let's talk about economic crises in Guanacaste. My name is Matt Rosensteel. I'm owner-broker of Coldwell Banker Pacific Realty, located here in Playa Junquillal. Every Friday at noon, I'm offering my free real estate advice, guidance that's meant to help empower people to make good decisions. As I mentioned today, I'm broadcasting from a condo that you can rent. We also have a very similar condo that you can buy down below. But the primary topic today is to talk about what happens in Guanacaste, Costa Rica during economic crises, and to try and wrap our heads around how you can look at a possible future crisis. First, let's talk about historic crises. And while we could obviously go back to the great crisis that was caused when Columbus and all of the germs that the Spanish let loose wrought havoc on the indigenous population, that would be too long and also too depressing. So instead, we're going to start more in our modern times. At the Great Depression, 1929, Costa Rica at that point, just like all of Central America, was absolutely almost a 100% agricultural economy. I don't know if there were any other activities at that point, but essentially they were 100% dependent on that newly globalizing economy where they were selling cash crops to the US and the people who essentially could dominate the political and economic landscape here. So obviously, the Great Depression had a huge impact on Costa Rica, where you saw the amount of goods that Costa Rica was exporting plummet, I think, to nearly a quarter or less than half of what it had been during the pre-Depression years. Now, obviously, a century ago or almost a century ago, that would have had huge impacts, but the economy then was extremely different than how it's been developing in the decades since. So to be honest, it's not absolutely relevant. There was then a food crisis in the 1950s. It never got to famine levels, but yes, there was extensive poverty. There was really, people had a difficult time putting food on the table. At that time, you still hear a lot of the older people in our area talk about all of the stuff that they were eating to survive. One of them was the Ramon nut that's native to this area, or the ojoche, all kinds of greens, etc., and a lot of dishes in Guanacaste that were the rural people's survival dishes at the time. It's important to remember, if we're talking specifically about Guanacaste, the northwestern province, in the 50s, almost everyone here was, to begin with, a subsistence farmer. You saw people really just trying to make any ends meet with a small piece of land. This was a completely agrarian area, but as a result, people were able to at least, go out and find food in the local ecosystem. You may not realize it, but it makes a huge difference to be in a tropical country when these crises hit. You don't necessarily have the immediate, horribly pressing demands on poor families because, frankly, they can survive at a bare minimum in extremely simple housing without a cold winter. You can find a lot of food to eat here year round. And that sort of thing can at least be a situation where you don't have quite the crisis level as you might see in a freezing cold or desert country, for example. Next, obviously, there was a massive economic crisis in the early 80s here rather globally, because of the oil situation, energy prices, etc. Costa Rica, of course, was not at all immune from that. And specifically at the time, they had a president, Carazo, who essentially did something that modern Costa Rica presidents don't do. And he told international monetary authorities that they didn't want to really borrow from specifically the IMF. And as a result, Costa Rica lost all of these loans that typically sustain it as a Central American country. And certainly the economic effects of what was happening in the early 80s globally were exacerbated by Costa Rica's local issues with credit and all of a sudden having a cutoff of the international finance. This is one key reason now why you would compare any potential future crisis, at least in the current political environment, fairly differently to that one in particular. Costa Rica, in fact, most recently has addressed nearly every budget shortfall, or when they need money, they're glad partners with these international financing organizations. And in fact, most of the change that has happened since the era of these crises is that Costa Rica's economy has become increasingly integrated with the global economy. It has also become increasingly diversified, where, yes, the absolute vast majority of the economy was agricultural back in the Great Depression. Today, it's far more mixed. It still has a huge agricultural sector, but you've seen a huge rise in the service sector, or rather, A lot of tech companies are bringing call centers down to the country. Costa Rica has hit its stride over the last decade, supplying semi-high educated labor that's definitely cheaper than US labor in the global economy. And specifically, they've been able to do that because in 2009, the country ratified CAFTA. CAFTA was not universally loved when it was passed here in Costa Rica. And in fact, the final vote was basically just over a majority in favor of ratifying and just under a majority opposed. There were definite PR efforts here in the country conducted by outside influences to sway the vote and convince people that CAFTA was the right approach. And while I don't want to criticize anything or get into that debate here, really, CAFTA is important because the 2009 crisis and the next crisis are both going to happen in a Costa Rica that is 100% integrated into this globalized economy. So, yes, we can look to 2009 for a lot of lessons as to what would happen here in Guanacaste. And for many reasons, mainly that it's the most recent crisis, it will be the most relevant to provide ideas as to what we could look at in the next crisis. I arrived in 2008, shortly after graduating from college with my proud liberal arts degree, and came down to Costa Rica about 6 months later through the Peace Corps. Originally, so I arrived in about May of 2008, and I spent the next 2 years or 27 months, more or less, in a little village of 360 people. So I actually saw the 2009 and 10 crash entirely from the perspective of this community of people where I was just sort of plunked down into a rural Guanacaste community. Here are some of the noteworthy things that I want to mention as what I saw. First, absolutely, even since the Great Depression, the tie that people have here to the land and their ecosystem and really to a community provides a web of support that poor people in other countries might not have. Specifically, small towns are made up of small family groups. Most of these families are all accustomed to living on very small amounts of money, and all of them will look out for each other in a social structure that's more like multiple family living than you see in the US or Canada. So yeah, you could have maybe 30 people in a poor family who all live on an acre or acre and a half of land, and grandma might have a pension. With that pension, especially with the diet that they eat, she can probably make food for a good quantity of the unemployed people every day. These rural communities here, most families are still eating rice, beans, and some kind of protein 3 meals a day. And even after inflation and where we are today, that's still an extremely affordable diet. And it certainly is if you're growing some of that yourself. I lived in a community where we had our own chickens. Obviously, there were eggs, lots of cows. There was always a bit of dairy. And more than anything, you saw that people who are used to living on almost no money to begin with have a lot of inventive ways to get through an economic crisis. And it's not to immediately grab a machete and start robbing foreigners whatsoever. They go to their family looking for work. They go to their uncles, their abuelos. Everybody could offer them some little bit of work. Most of them don't have to pay rent because they're living in that family compound. So they're looking for a bare survival wage that keeps their kid in a public school with the shoes, with the uniforms, with the books, etc. They're also looking to keep their food on the table and some very other basic expenses. But in Guanacaste, if you haven't been here, a vast majority of the communities here are very humble Guanacasteco communities that, to be honest, the difference between formal full-time employment and unemployment is a lot less money lost. And really, I had a blast. I'm sorry, not a blast, but during those years in '09 and 10, you saw my host family constantly going out to the beach. There are mangroves with almost limitless crabs. Got really tired of eating crab or trying not to. Fishing all along the coast here in Guanacaste. Virtually everyone can do it. I once went with a guy to the beach who made his lure on the way and ended up catching a fish. And it was wild because here they'll immediately catch a fish, rehook it, throw the fish back into the water and try and get some big stuff. And you would think there's no way that guys standing on the beach with this, a little piece of wood, this string wrapped around, a hook in their homemade lure are going to catch anything. When the fish are running, they're coming home with bags of it, and you can dry it, you can smoke it. Fish is another thing that gets very boring once you've had a huge run of it, and your family can get free protein from all of those ureles for the next 6 weeks. It was delicious, though. So anyway, what I feel is that when people picture an economic crisis, for the Guanacasteco communities that are here, it's going to be one thing. For the real estate developers who were here in '09, it was absolutely disastrous in that most of the progress, what was being created at that time was speculative development, 100%. People had discovered Guanacaste in 2000. There was a fury to buy all kinds of land. And by 2008, you had land prices that were many factors more valuable than they were back in the late 90s. So the crisis in '09 was people who had bought in at the absolute, at the time, top dollar in an area where investment was absolutely just about to fall out from under everything. And you saw an absolute paralysis of development. With that phrase, I want to move on to talking about what I think will happen in the next crisis. And again, to reiterate, I'm not trying to express my opinion on the timing of the next one or whether we're already in one or whether or not the 535 Homo sapiens in Congress decide to throw us into one artificially. And I use that term Homo sapiens generously. In this next crisis, one of the biggest changes in Guanacaste that you're going to see is that paralysis of development. Because frankly, a good percentage of developers here do not truly have the financial backing to completely implement a project from now through completion. They have the cash flow to pick up a property, to get some friends interested, and to start generating their program. But if they don't find a way to move their project forward with interest-free or low-interest loans, they can be in a lot of trouble. And you'll see that right now, we're almost seeing the same, not frenzied level of development that was here prior to 2009, but absolutely, ever since the borders reopened in 2020, you had an absolute explosion in the real estate market here, and developers have been rushing to meet that demand. In the next economic crisis that comes to Guanacaste, I actually think that you won't necessarily see a complete lack of buyers that come into the real estate market because we still have huge numbers of US, Canadians, et cetera, who want to relocate. But I do think that in the recent years, you still have a lot of developers in the area who have planned their businesses so that they need to start seeing financial return very soon. And if they don't have existing homes and existing condos to receive those refugees right now, those are the people who are going to be vulnerable in this next crisis just like 09 and 10. I'm not saying anything that's incredibly difficult to foresee. If I were an investor thinking that there was an upcoming crisis, I would definitely look at any potential developer that I was going to work with and want to understand that they had solid financial footing in order to actually implement their project. Let me see here. Who will win, or who can be positioned well if we're headed into a big economic crisis? Honestly, what I feel the huge opportunity in this area now is for those developers who actually have the cash flow to start putting together projects that will be ready on a cycle where the next upswing is happening. Right now, unfortunately, most developers have probably missed a window from 2021 through 2022 that was a prime sales opportunity that might not be seen again. Things are cooling off now. Given all of the changes that are happening in the world, there is a possibility things will swing up dramatically. But this episode is about possible crises. And if we see a crisis, as somebody who's never too worried about too much, I'm sure that there will be daybreak after the crisis. And in Costa Rica, what traditionally happens, or rather what happened in 2010, was that all of those developers who absolutely lost themselves, they were over leveraged, they didn't have the cash flow to actually build their project. They held on through 2012, 13, 14, 15, as long as they possibly could. They did it, they kept putting in money. They kept their guardhouse going. Some even kept security guards at a project. But many of these developers eventually had to sell their asset to any buyer that was willing to pick it up, whether it was in 16 through 2020. A lot of those people who had not seen their vision through in the last crisis ended up having to sell cheap. The people who picked up those cheap properties back in 2017 and 18, and they were ready with fully finished, beautiful condos in 2021 and 2022, were absolutely thrilled with their investment, and they had the perfect timing. So right now, if I'm advising anyone out there, I definitely see that there is opportunity past the next crisis whenever it comes. I think that many developers are going to be consumed, or they're going to go out of business in whatever happens next. And that's really where an opportunity can lie. If you're just a buyer looking for potentially one property to pick up in the next crisis, my biggest piece of advice is to put yourself in the position to get the lead on that property. And specifically, you need to find your community. You need to find the project that you want to buy in, and you need to find a good realtor who's willing to watch that particular project like a hawk, so that when this potential economic crisis starts to bite sellers in their buns and a few people start to sell, you can be the first to know. I would not simply sit back watching all of the real estate listings out there and thinking, oh, any moment we're going to see fire sale after fire sale. You won't see that because everyone owns their property in Guanacaste in cash. But if you have a guy like me who knows every single property owner in a community, who gets the first phone call when people say, Matt, we're just done with the condo. We really can't pay those costs anymore, and I want you to liquidate it. You have me on the hook to call you so that you can see those opportunities before they hit the market. Before I get to my end segment, remember, I have got some helpful advice for new realtors in Guanacaste, especially in the context of both watching my channel and an upcoming crisis. We had some great questions that I did want to answer here. Jerry Stewart asked, as tourism is getting closer and closer to pre-pandemic levels, which were 1 million more visitors each year versus 2009, 2010, how do you see that strong tourism demand impact or stave off any crash? Excellent, excellent question, Jerry. Uh, First, it's important to mention that both tourism and foreign investment in these luxury homes, etc., yes, they make up a very significant portion of Guanacaste's economy, but Costa Rica as a whole also has a huge percentage of its GDP that's located in the Central Valley, which is an urban area and the home to all of these intel jobs. A lot of the customer service departments from the world are in San Jose in Costa Rica. So it's important to differentiate that these tourism numbers that absolutely will help the Guanacaste real estate market, the local economy in this rural area, on and on. Because there's such a significant portion of our economy, if we can keep that tourism going through a crisis, Junquillal is going to be fine, to be totally honest. Our local economy is basically the 7 or 8 larger operating hotels, 10 restaurants, and 1 incredible real estate brokerage. So it doesn't take much to keep that sort of small community economy humming along. Even in Tamarindo, you can see that there will be fewer tourists, but because tourists are leaving a lot of money in these destinations, when it comes to actually keeping food on the table for very humble Costa Rican families and Nicaraguan families who live nearby, that tourism can actually really help us stave off a crash. And if I didn't, I'd feel I failed to ever get to the point when I was talking about my rural community. The long story short is that the economic crisis of 2009 and 10 looked a heck of a lot alike to real life there before everyone had construction jobs, security jobs, and different stuff that was coming in through tourism. In fact, a lot of people were they were reeling because they had maybe had 5 or 6 years of solid work off the farm, which was great, going to be a security guard at a hotel versus the cattle ranching they had been accustomed to. Suddenly they lose their job, but in that community, it was pretty much life as usual. And in Guanacaste, you're definitely going to see resilient communities that, yeah, there will be fewer jobs. You will see a lot more unemployment, the guys walking around the street. I'm sure petty theft statistics, if they're kept, you'll see those. They need more money because no one can give them their beer for free. It's literally a trickle-down kind of economy in that way. If the local agricultural laborers don't have work, or if the security guards don't have work, they don't buy the little pachitas of liquor for their friends, and soon everyone needs a little bit more money. But other than that, life can largely stay how it feels in these tiny communities. Also wanted to mention, we're sitting in this beautiful condo here. I have not mentioned it up to this point. Thanks very much to my amazing clients for offering their condo as a last-minute studio. If you want to rent a wonderful place here that's comfortable enough, even for Rita Rosensteel, my mother, you should definitely consider where I'm sitting right now, which is Plaza Tierra Pacifica, condo number 6. They're only asking $175 a night. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo. You're on the 3rd floor of a facility that feels like Fort Knox in terms of security. You can go through 2 gates or a secure elevator to get up here. And overall, the owners of this condo have decked it out. They've made it super comfortable, and it's ready for your stay at only $175 a night, $1,360 a week, or $4,200 for a full month here in Costa Rica. We're less than a mile from a white sand beach in that direction. There's a darling pool down there that's only shared by 7 condos. You even have a supermarket 2 floors below you. So it's super convenient. If you want to rent this condo, the contact for this particular unit and no other rentals in the area We're going to put her email address on the screen so that you can have it. Steph is super nice. She is friendly and waiting for your call. She is also willing to offer a special promo code. If you send promo code Costa Rica Matt to Steph, you will get a 3.0001% discount. Again, over 3% off if you use promo code Costa Rica Matt to rent your condo now. I'm doing the math. 3 times $1.70 is $5.10. That's your sway with Costa Rica Matt. Just by watching YouTube, you can save yourself not one, not 2, 3, or 4, but $5 and an additional 10 cents. Before I log off, I have an end segment here. We've been experimenting with the Rager of the Week. I thought about the Rant of the Week. We have Client of the Week. And today I wanted to offer my helpful advice to the new realtors in Guanacaste, and really those new agents or comisionistas, all of the people who have got here more recently and who are throwing yourselves helpfully into the ring in the real estate industry to help others achieve their dreams. And I do know that several of these folks are definitely watching my channel for advice. I know this because several of them, in fact, more often than you'd expect, reach out to me, establish a relationship as a possible buyer of property, even go on property tours with me various times, all from watching my YouTube channel to then join our local real estate industry with a competing firm to then text me to request information on a Saturday afternoon. So this is for all those people who are really going to need guidance, especially as we see an economic crisis that is inevitably going to come to Guanacaste, Costa Rica. Specifically, I hope very much that you understand between 2008 and 2011, Guanacaste lost a lot of realtors and real estate agents who could no longer stay afloat once the market was no longer in the bubble conditions that I've been talking about on my channel. Most of them probably got into the game too late to really build up the necessary things that were going to help them through an economic crisis. First and foremost, definitely owning your property so that you don't have the cost of renting, building up a personal marketing funnel like a YouTube channel so that you already have clients before the crisis, whether or not they're going to buy property through you. And finally, you really, really, really need to have a deep-rooted network of relationships that will keep your real estate business alive, even though you're a recent arrival. Best of luck to you. If we hit a crisis, I hope that this can continue to be bumper business for everyone, even those who don't have quite as much experience or who aren't working here even legally. But definitely it could be interesting as things move forward. Thanks very much for watching, and see you next week, folks.